This story happened back in Minnesota when I was about 6 or 7 years old. We lived in South Minneapolis at the time, in an old house. My family and I had many supernatural experiences that drove us to leave that house, but I will write about those another time. I have a family of 6, but at that time, one of my mom's cousins from Thailand came to stay with us. She took the room that my little brother and I slept in. This left us to sleep in my parents' room. The first thing I remember was my mom waking us up in the middle of the night. She packed a couple of things for us and my uncle came to pick us up. My siblings and I stayed at my uncle's house that night. I had no idea why at the time and never bothered to ask. When we returned back home, my aunt was gone. A couple of days later, my parents, my uncle, and his wife all decided to go to a New Year's party that night. That left my 3 cousins and my siblings with us at our house. The oldest out of all of us was probably around 14 years old. We all had this great idea of turning off all the lights and playing hide and seek in the dark. My cousin Pa and I decided to go and hide in my aunt's closet. We knew the seeker wouldn't be brave enough to check behind all the clothes since the closet was dark and creepy. Pa and I figured that since we would be together, there wouldn't be anything to fear. I sat at one corner of the closet and she sat next to me. A couple of minutes passed by and nobody came into the room yet. Pa asked, "Mai, are you still there? I'm scared." I answered her and grabbed her hand. Her hand was so cold. I figured it was because she was so scared since my house was known to be haunted. Something didn't feel right to me though, so I reached over with my other hand to touch Pa's head. Sure enough, what I felt was extremely tangled hair. Pa let go of my hand and the light in the closet suddenly turned on and my brother opened the door. "Dude, we have been calling you guys for like 10 minutes now. Why didn't you guys come out?" Obviously, we didn't hear anything, but when Pa and I looked at each other, I immediately started getting really scared and she did too. Pa was seated at the opposite corner of me, about 5 feet away, and not next to me. She was way too far for me to hold her hand or let alone touch her. I know she didn't move because the distance was too far for her to move that fast without me noticing. We ran out of the closet and into the living room and explained to my brother and cousin what just happened. My brother's face went pale. This was when we discovered the secret that had been hidden from us for so long. That night, when my mom woke us up to leave with my uncle, it was because my mom's cousin from Thailand hung herself in that same closet that Pa and I were hiding in. I wasn't holding Pa's hand or touching her hair. Instead, it must have been my dead aunt who died in her closet. Almost 20 years ago, when the internet and cell phones weren't a thing yet, I lived in the projects in St. Paul. I had a friend named Me who was dating this guy who had just moved from California to Minnesota, but she had never seen him. She had been talking to him nonstop and carrying the phone with her all over the place, even outside, bringing the long cord with her so we could smoke cigarettes. I remember her passing the phone to me, and I also got to know Michael better. One day we had the opportunity to go and meet him. He was a rather nerdy guy, but he was with the trends, bell-bottoms and a nice shirt. Unfortunately, my friend and Michael eventually broke up. We remained good friends and would see each other whenever we crossed paths. I used to hang out with the people who dropped out and partied like crazy, and he started dating this girl named Micah, who hung out with a more sketchy, gang-affiliated group. I remember seeing Michael for the last time at a house party in Frogtown when we were all drunk and high. I also knew his girlfriend, and she wasn't threatened by our friendship, I think. I just remember that she was a lot more aggressive and sharp. Michael was basically putty in her hands. However, the years flew by and we lost touch. When I was in college, I met with Micah's brother, Lao Su, by happenstance. He looked terrible. I spotted him in the dark on campus and he scared the crap out of me. He looked skinny, gaunt, and his face was blistering, peeling. all the telltale signs of a meth addict. He kept asking me if I had any money, and I gave him a 20 because he looked rough. I asked him how Micah and Michael were doing. He told me Michael was missing. Apparently, his family moved back to California and he disappeared. I asked what Micah's thoughts were, and he said that Micah has no idea where he went and has feigned ignorance. He added that Michael's family was blaming his sister for his disappearance because she was the last person he was with. I haven't seen this guy for years, but lately I've been having dreams of him. It's so weird because I haven't thought of him in years. I wonder if he's been found and where he's at now. I hope he's well wherever he may be. My family used to live in Roosevelt Public Housings in St. Paul, Minnesota. It was a 3-bedroom unit, and I had a room all to myself as my brothers shared a room and my baby sister slept with my parents. I remember one night as I was sleeping, I heard loud thrashing coming from outside my bedroom door. I was awakened and debated if I should get up and check. I was covered in sweat and trembled in fear, but I needed to know who it was that was making such a loud noise outside of my room. I slowly got up and tiptoed over to my door. As I slowly reached for my doorknob, the thrashing suddenly stopped. I waited for a few seconds and walked back to my bed. Then, the thrashing continued just as soon as I laid back down. I pulled the covers over my head and eventually went to sleep. The next morning, I questioned my brothers if they were trying to scare me that night, and they both denied, saying that they were asleep the whole time. There were times when I would hear knockings or scratches from the other side of the wall. There are 4 units that are connected, and ours was the second one. If anything, we can hear from Unit 1 and Unit 3. A curious and mischievous kid I would always knock back. We played this game of knocking back and forth until I got spooked and stopped. But the knockings continued as if it was telling me to knock again. My dad works 3rd shift, so he doesn't stay with us at night. During the hot summer days, my mom and my siblings would sleep in the living room with the AC. We only owned 1 AC at the time, so my parents put it in the living room as that is the room we usually spend the most time in. My mom would report to my dad that during the night, she would hear the front screen door swinging open and slight knockings on the door. The first few nights, she thought it was probably the wind, so every night before she went to sleep, she made sure to lock the screen door. My mom said that it doesn't happen consecutively. However, some nights, she would experience the same incidents. Eventually, we moved out of there after living 2 to 3 years. This story isn't mine. I heard it play on a Hmong radio, so I'm just translating the story into English to share with the community. Back in 2005, my husband and I still lived in California. My husband was a gangster before we moved here to Minnesota. He was just a lazy slob, and after 4 years of marriage, we got very comfortable and gained quite a bit of weight. One night, we were supposed to go barbecue and play some board games with our friends. On the way there, he was driving. Like I said, we were very comfortable, so whenever he needed to fart, he'd fart while I'm still in the car with him. He forced his fart and it was a wet fart with diarrhea. We had to drive home to change. After we changed and went back on our way, one of our friends called and said that there was a drive-by at our friend's house. Our friend, Seng, got shot in the stomach. My friend Stacy was shot in the chest and died when the ambulance got there. The both of us went straight to the hospital. Seng was in surgery for a long time before they transferred him to the ICU. During Stacy's funeral on the first day before they brought her body in, I was eating some pork with Hmong pepper sauce and started having a stomach ache. I went to the bathroom at the funeral home and there were 2 ladies in the bathroom. I felt relieved that they were also there. I sat on the toilet as the 2 ladies washed their hands. Then I heard them leave. The door closed for about 20 seconds. Then someone came in. I was scared but felt relief that someone came in and used the stall next to me. The strange thing was that this person walked like she didn't wear any shoes just by the way of her walking sound. She then sat on the toilet, and I looked down and saw the side of her right foot. The veins were visible and appeared to be dark in color. That person was just all quiet. I finished up and left the room. Before noon, Stacy's body arrived. As usual, the people sat her body on the floor and did some rituals before they put her inside the casket. Once in the casket, her mom was crying with her aunts and I there. Her mom touched her arms and started touching her legs and feet. As her mom slid her hands back and forth on Stacy's feet, I saw the dark veins on her feet even though she was wearing shoes. I was so scared that day that I didn't stay until dark. I told my husband to take me home, and he did. On the way home, I told him what happened, and he said that I shouldn't go to the funeral. That night, my husband went back to the funeral, and I was home alone. At 11 p.m., I went to bed. At around 1 in the morning, I woke up, and my husband was already sleeping, but with his back towards me, so I turned towards him and put my arm around his shoulder. Then, at 3 a.m., my cell phone rang. I kept my phone underneath my pillow. I took it out and answered it. It was my husband. He said he didn't feel safe driving home because he had been drinking and for me to go pick him up. I asked if he went back because he was just sleeping here earlier. He said that he never came home after dropping me off. That was when I realized that I was in bed alone, but I'm not even sure who was in bed with me earlier. Here's another story that happened to my older brother and his group of friends a couple of years ago. As you all may or may not know, my brother was the type of person who loved to go out at night. He'd go out with his friends and you probably wouldn't see him as much. Back in 2014, my brother and his friends went to the Swede Hollows Park in St. Paul, Minnesota to hang out late this one night. They were all sitting by the bench area, messing around and talking about life as they toured the whole trail down. They passed an electric fence that had a building on the other side, which belonged to an old factory built in the 1950s from the first Swedish folks that arrived. As they passed the fence, one of the friends felt this weird chill that passed him. Let's call him William. William was the most easily frightened one out of the entire group. My brother, Nicholas, told William to stop pulling on his backpack and to not be a wimp. My brother told him to stop messing around, otherwise everyone was going to ditch him if they saw something. Anyways, as the group reached the end of the trail, which intersected Tupani Avenue, close to downtown St. Paul, one of Nicholas's friend, Gomeng, said that he saw someone waving at him from a tree a couple of feet away from them. My brother told his friend to stop playing around, but Gomeng swore up and down that he wasn't joking. Suddenly, one of their other friends, Stephen, turned around to look at a tree and saw someone waving at him too. Stephen told Nicholas to look at the tree behind him. My brother turned around and, what do you know? He saw what appears to be someone leaning against a tree on top of a hill. The moon's light had shined bright down towards the figure leaning up against the tree. The man was wearing a suit that looked like something made in the 1900s. He had shoes that were neatly polished and shiny. However, he was missing one thing: his whole neck and head. This figure kept waving at the group of boys. This was when my brother yelled for all of them to run. They ran half a mile back to the car and immediately returned home that night. All of them decided that it was safe to sleep over at our house. This story was experienced by my older cousins, and I'm telling it by memory. It's one of my favorite ghost stories. I believe this occurred in the late 90s or early 2000s in Minnesota. I had 3 older cousins who were brothers. The oldest brother was a gangster at the time, and the 3 of them decided to play the Ouija board in their room. At the beginning of playing it, they asked who they were speaking with. It spelled out Mary. The oldest brother acted tough and said things along the lines of, "This isn't even scary," or "I'm not scared of you." After saying those phrases, the window curtains closed on its own and the lights turned off in the room. It instantly became cold. The two younger brothers were scared and asked if they could leave. The Ouija board kept saying no. They ran to the door to try to get out of the room. However, the door wouldn't open. They told the older brother to apologize. The older brother, also scared, finally apologized, and they were able to open the door afterwards and leave. They told their parents what happened, and they called my grandma over. She was a shaman. My grandma lived with my other cousins and came over when she was told what happened. One of my other cousins, who lived with my grandma at the time, was really young, maybe around 9. He also came over with her. To this day, when we would talk about this story, he would explain what he saw. He said that when Grandma and him went over, she didn't go into the room where the Ouija board was played. She went straight to the bathroom and talked with the mirror. He recalled her saying things like, "Sorry, and please forgive them." Hey everybody, I live here in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I work in Brooklyn Park. I work late at night. About 6 or 7 months ago, me and a couple of my buddies at work were telling scary ghost stories. That night, when I got off of work, I saw someone standing under the tree. I got a little spooked, but I didn't really care, so I drove home that night. Within a month or two, my son kept telling me that he sees eyes in his closet. I didn't believe him at first. I thought perhaps it was his imagination. But then 2 months later, my son and my daughter were playing hide and seek in the afternoon. I had a pile of clothes by the corner. I heard my son say, "I found you," and then he went back to look at those pile of clothes but didn't see my daughter there. He ran to me and told me that he saw someone in that pile of clothes. That night, I told my wife about it, and the next day she went to go see a shaman lady. That lady told her that, yeah, there was somebody in the house besides us. It was whatever I brought in about 6 or 7 months ago that followed me home. My wife said that it was a little boy that followed me home. He saw my son and just wanted to play with him. The shaman tied some special strings and gave it to the family to protect us. Ever since then, I haven't seen or heard anything. It was 3:20 a.m. as I woke up to the scent of something foul, unlike anything I'd ever smelled before. I nudged my sleeping husband next to me. Now, my husband is a very heavy sleeper. Once he's out, he's out. I continued to nudge his shoulder until he woke up. I asked him if he could smell anything unusual, but he claimed that he didn't, and didn't know what I was talking about. I brushed it off and went back to bed. The following morning, I get a text message from my sister saying that our grandma had a sudden heart attack and passed away last night around 10 p.m. I live in a different state, so no one called to notify me earlier. I could only cry and reminisce about my memories of my sweet grandma. I was very close to her growing up. Once again, at around 3 a.m. that night, I smelled something foul again, except this time, it was much stronger. As I tossed and turned half asleep and half awake, I felt a presence behind me, almost like a sleep paralysis experience where you can't move at all. I could feel the hair on my neck rise and my body break into a cold sweat. I couldn't tell if I was asleep or stuck in a trance at this point. I was too scared to turn around and face whatever it was behind me. I could only force my eyes to shut and pray. What felt like forever finally disappeared. Now, my husband is Christian, but my side of the family is still very traditional. That following morning, I reached out to my mother and explained to her about what had been happening. She told me to be strong and she would ask a shaman. That same day, a shaman lady reached out to me and looked into my situation. She told me that there was something attached to me. I couldn't remember what she recommended, but with my husband being converted, I knew his side of the family would not help me with a shaman ceremony. so I had to wait until I could visit my parents. I slept fine for the next 4 days. Nothing happened and I didn't wake up anymore around 3 a.m. However, on the 5th night, I had the same thing happen again. I slept facing the closed bedroom door and could smell the foul stench. I don't know what possessed me at the time, but I grabbed my nearby phone and glanced at the time. At that moment, from the corner of my eye, I saw a dark shadow with red glowing eyes at the corner of my bedroom near my dresser. My heart sank and I could hear my own heartbeat at this point. I know it knew that I saw it. I quickly coiled into a fetus position underneath my bedsheets and prayed. I ended up falling asleep just like that. The following morning, I told my husband what was happening. I cried and pleaded with him for us to visit my parents. He didn't 100% believe me but agreed anyways. He took off of work and we drove to my parents' home. I cried to my mother and told her I needed help. She called over the shaman lady and had her look into my situation. The shaman told me my grandma was sad I didn't visit her for the past 2 years ever since I got married. She just wanted to visit me and watch over me apparently. I told the shaman that there are better ways that she could have visited me. My parents did a little hooplee ceremony to call my spirit back. The shaman lady tied something onto me and told me that she would send a message to my grandma and for her to stop. Long story short, after we buried my grandma, the following month it stopped. I don't experience anything anymore, at least for now.